Peace to the family. Today I'm gonna share a story about how I wound up fulfilling probably a lifelong calling and destiny, which was to set foot on the African continent and eventually live on African soil. Okay. So going back into my childhood, one of the first dreams that I actually can recall was a dream with my mother and I being kidnapped by African people. Or what really had happened was being kidnapped from Africa. I grew up in the 70s where you would see films like Zulu Dawn, films that had negative portrayals of African people and indigenous people, which kind of goes to what I'm talking about. For example, my grandmother, a very tall, beautiful woman with beautiful eyes and long hair. This is my grandmother on my maternal side, but also my grandmother, Madir. Madir is on my paternal side and Granny is on my maternal side. But both of these ladies had a very exotic look to them, which, points to an indigenous root of my family. It's pronounced on both sides of my family, and it's I would say it's occasionally discussed, and it's oftentimes hushed. On the paternal side, it's hushed. But being from an area of East Alabama, the East Alabama Plains, Tuskegee, Alabama, Lochapoka, Alabama, Notasulga, Alabama, Muskogee, the Muskogee area. So there are there are some indigenous roots on both sides of my family. My mother's maternal side, we're talking about on the Ohio River, very close to the Mississippian culture, which would be located near a place called Angel Mounds. Okay, so I go back to my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother. I have photos of these women, straight indigenous. So that being said, I always rooted for the Indians, the indigenous people, when these, like I say, I'm a child of the 70s. So these movies were from the 60s and 50s, the John Wayne pictures, the Indian fighter pictures. But I always felt a kinship with the indigenous Americans, the Plains Indians. Now there's a difference between the Plains Indians and the Indians of the Northwest Territory. The Northwest Territory at that time being Indiana, Ohio, down to Florida, Virginia, those areas. Okay, but back to Africa. My grandfather was a World War II soldier, and he served in the African campaign, also in Sicily, Sardinia. And from what I recall, he used to tell my mother, he said, when she would be, daydreaming or whatever, he would say that you left your mind in Timbuktu. Your mind is in Timbuktu, Mali. Their home, my grandparents' home, was decorated with a lot of African art, a lot of sculptures and things of that nature. So my interest in Africa was piqued at an early age, right? And my father would tell me about his grandfather, and his grandfather being associated with Booker T. Washington, the Garvey movement, the Back to Africa movement of Garvey, and whatsoever. So I always had this spiritual link to indigenous people, whether they were from Africa or whether they were from here in the United States. But there was always this calling, this yearning for Africa. I remember doing projects on Africa in social studies. I was just telling a friend of mine that I had a particular interest in maps, and I would remember the world map, the American map. I was just geographically inclined. So to fast forward, this interest followed me to my days of university study, and I was studying African psychology, well, psychology in general, but I was influenced by the group of African American psychologists, which started a group called ABPSI, which was African-Centered Psychology. We're talking Dr. Welsling, Dr. Francis Quest Welsling, Dr. Naeem Akbar, Dr. Charles Finch, Dr. Asa Hilliard, which went on into ASCAC, the Association of the study of classical African civilizations. So my first time going to Africa, very ragamuffin in the sense of a shoestring budget. Probably never have went because of financial struggles. But I remember being in LaGuardia Airport in New York City, and I didn't have a lot of money left, but I had some accommodations and some money. So I went on to, I landed in Dakar, Senegal. I went on to the Gambia, beautiful Gambia. I stayed in Gambia. I was introduced to some very beautiful people, the Mandinka people, the Manjako, a lot of Fula people as well. So I think I was there maybe 4 or 5 weeks. A beautiful experience. But one thing I took from that experience was that I remember a friend that I met in the Gambia, a brother named Sule. Sule, he mentioned to me Abidjan. Go on to Abidjan. He was teaching me some of the Mandinka language. I think there was a phrase, what is it? Abinyadi, how's the body? Abidjan, I be fine. He was telling me how the people, as they would travel, the Mindi people, the Mandinka people, as they would travel to different places from Mali, the Gambia, Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, even Ghana, he was telling me, they would modify the language. They would speak the language differently, but they could still understand one another. So, fast forward, 2014, 2015, United States was going through a troubling time in terms of racial unrest. Michael Brown, a young brother in St. Louis, Missouri, was gunned down by a police, Darren Brown. The white people rallied behind Darren Brown. And out of this movement came a movement, Black Lives Matter. But also, later on, it was George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland. And all of these people became martyrs in the African American community. But not only African Americans were being killed, but there were some, white Americans that were in the fight, in the battle as well, and were killed, protesting the deaths of these African Americans. But even before then, there was a brother, Amadou Diallo, that was killed in New York. Abner Louima was a Haitian brother that was killed in New York. So during all of this time, I became very frustrated with just living in the United States. So I was having problems getting a job. So I started training to become a English as a second language teacher. I went through a 20-hour program, in-class participation, which was housed at Oglethorpe University in Atlanta, Georgia. It was over the span of maybe a month or so. Just weekend studies. I think classes began at 9 o'clock in the morning and ended at 5. So you could add it up 2 days a week, Saturday and Sunday. So I was certified as a English as a second language specialist, and as a TOEFL, which is teaching English, the equivalency test that foreign students learn in the equivalency for English to come to English-speaking countries. All right. So my first position that I was offered was in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But I had some problems getting the visa. So serendipitously, a friend of mine, his parents had a language school in Cotonou, Benin, and Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire as well. So both of these being Francophone countries, I wound up in Abidjan. Ironically, which Suleiman, my friend in Gambia, he pointed out to that several years before. We're talking maybe 10 or 15 years before. He said, Abidjan, Abidjan. And it stuck. And I wound up in Abidjan. I wound up teaching English in Abidjan. And a friend of mine, his wife was Jola, from the ethnic group, the Jolas. And I was telling her, that I had went to the Gambia. She was like, So I said some words to her in Mandinka. And the Bambara language and Mandinka and Jola, they're very, very similar. And the words that I was speaking were, you know, good morning, how are you? I'm fine. These words. And she was like, oh, you can speak my language. And she said, well, the people here in Gambia, that's how they speak this language. This dialect is Gambian. But she was able to understand it as an Ivorian, right? So that was my welcoming to Cote d'Ivoire. So I taught English in Cote d'Ivoire for maybe 4 or 5 years. I met my wife. I had a child. And I experienced living, learning, and loving in Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa. So this is my story. This is how I wound up in Africa, living and working in Africa. I'll share more of my story and more of my stories later in this series on my station here on YouTube. So if you get anything from it, like or subscribe, and we can talk about things that pertain to an expat life, living, working in West Africa. Okay, so like and subscribe to my channel. I would appreciate it so much. Have a wonderful day.